big headline that we've been bringing you all day today. 2611 mastermind Hafiz Saeed did not waste any time after his release from house arrest. He began spewing anti-India propaganda, threatened to carry out more attacks in the name of Islam. Washington replied with strong reprimand, demanding his arrest. Is this more lip service? Will Washington ensure Islamabad complies? WION's Aditya Dhunna reports.
Despite massive outrage, Hafiz Saeed, one of the most wanted terrorists in South Asia, was released on Friday from house arrest for the third time. Amid the celebrations, Hafiz Saeed made his agenda clear to the world. He spewed more venom and threatened more attacks against India and around the world. But there is something else on Hafiz Saeed's mind. With the support of the Pakistani establishment, he is seeking an image makeover. There is strong speculation that Saeed will take charge of the Milli Muslim League, a political offshoot of terrorist organization Jamaat-ud-Dawa. Leaders of the Milli Muslim League have backed Hafiz Saeed's leadership. In an interview to the New York Times in September, the League's campaign manager Naveed Qamar said Hafiz Saeed will lead the party once he is released from house arrest. And Hafiz Saeed has taken a professional approach towards his political outfit. On its website, the Milli Muslim League boasts itself as a party of ideals with a promise of well-qualified and accomplished leadership for Pakistan. But these ambitious plans could be derailed by the Americans. In a statement today, the US State Department asked the Pakistani government to make sure Hafiz Saeed is behind bars. The State Department said Saeed remains a global terrorist facing US sanctions. The US expressed deep concerns over his release and demanded his immediate arrest. So far, the Pakistani establishment has been turning a blind eye to Hafiz Saeed, but with Washington putting pressure on Islamabad, can diplomacy bring Hafiz Saeed to justice? Bureau Report, WION.
Now the question, will Pakistan comply? If it wanted to, how would it do that? We've got some advice from Islamabad for free to negotiate this ostensibly complicated legal issue and put Saeed where he belongs, behind bars. But first, let's take a look at what happened in court on the 22nd of November when Hafiz Saeed managed to get relief. This matter was heard by a review board comprising judges from the Lahore High Court. This board agreed that Hafiz Saeed must be set free as the state has failed to provide any compelling evidence against him. A senior official from Pakistan's finance ministry failed to convince the court. The argument was that if Hafiz Saeed is released, this decision would have diplomatic and financial repercussions for Pakistan. More specifically, sanctions, which would bring foreign funding in the country to a halt. But the judges were not convinced. They refused to extend the detention orders due to lack of evidence. If Pakistan wants to detain Hafiz Saeed today, can it do it? It can by issuing fresh detention orders under the old pretext of maintaining public order. Again, for this detention to have any legal validity, the Pakistan government would need to prove its orders in court by providing valid evidence, which they have a mountain of, courtesy India. They failed to do it this time. In the last time when Hafiz Saeed was under house arrest, which is why we've called it a sham throughout. Unfortunately, as things stand today, there's little to suggest that there's been a change of heart in Pakistan. Joining us, WION's correspondent from Washington, Harry Horton. Good evening, Harry. What has prompted the strong statement from the State Department in Washington?
Good evening. Well, the United States since 2012 has had a $10 million reward for any information that might lead to bringing Hafiz Saeed to justice. So clearly they are very keen to see him behind bars. The United States State Department said it was deeply concerned about the release of Hafiz Saeed from house arrest. They also say that they designate the Lashkar-e-Taiba organisation as a foreign terrorist organisation. The US says that they're responsible for the deaths of hundreds of civilians, including many US citizens as well. Hafiz Saeed himself is designated by the United States as a specially designated global terrorist, and he's also under UN sanctions as well by the UN Security Council. So clearly the United States is not happy about this release from house arrest. They say the Pakistani government should make sure that he is arrested and charged for his crime. So I think what we're seeing from the US State Department is a lot of frustration and disappointment about this release from house arrest.
This is also weeks after the United States Congress said that Pakistan is not obliged to act against the Lashkar-e-Toiba, an outfit headed by Hafiz Saeed. So there is some contradiction there. But the question now is, will these strong words be followed by action if Pakistan fails to do the needful?
Well, I think we'll have to wait and see. I think since Donald Trump has come into office, the US relationship with Pakistan has been rocky. Certainly earlier on this year, the Trump administration expressed frustration that they didn't think Pakistan was doing enough to clamp down on terror organizations, and they thought there was more work they could do. The relations between the US and Pakistan improved slightly in October with the release of the American hostage Caitlin Coleman, but certainly this latest news about the release of Hafiz Saeed from house arrest I think will be very frustrating. Certainly the US State Department has already confirmed that. I think we'll wait and see in the coming days and weeks how the White House itself and how Donald Trump, the US President, responds, but one would imagine that this won't do any good for US-Pakistan relations at the moment, considering the rocky year that they've already had.
What kind of pressure is the administration in Washington under from some quarters in the US on acting against Pakistan, on holding it accountable? Many have questioned, we understand, why it still retains the status of a major non-NATO ally.
Yeah, I think the administration is under great pressure from some people in Congress. Some Republican and Democrat senators would like to see the US take a much tougher line on Pakistan and encourage Pakistan to do more to clamp down on terror organizations. They'd also like to see Pakistan do more when it comes to the war in Afghanistan at the moment. So certainly the White House will come under a lot of pressure to persuade Pakistan to take a tougher line here. The question is, Donald Trump has lots of different foreign policy priorities. It's whether or not that message comes through from those members of Congress for Donald Trump to put it at the top of his list of foreign policy priorities and to really try and get Pakistan to do more to clamp down on these terror groups.
Harry Horton, appreciate you joining us. Thanks very much for that update from Washington. With us, a special panel of guests this evening as well. G. Parthasarathy, former High Commissioner to Pakistan, also former Information Advisor at the Prime Minister's office in New Delhi, with us from New Delhi. Stephen Golub, International Affairs Expert from California, and Mayad Ali, Senior Defense Analyst, with us from Islamabad. Good evening to all of you.
Good evening.
Mr. Parthasarathy, what do you make of America's response? Is this more lip service, according to you?
No, it's just confusion in the Trump administration. Look, I was in Washington 3 weeks ago when I met a number of congressmen, and there was a bipartisan consensus and draft legislation naming the Taliban, the Haqqani network and the Al-Qaeda as terrorist groups against whom action had to be taken. This was with bipartisan consensus. Then the legislation is amended at the request reportedly of Defense Secretary Mattis, and Al-Qaeda is dropped from the list. So in effect, Pakistan is told, you deal with the Taliban and Haqqani network, but you can do what you want with the Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Jamaat-ud-Dawa. So that is a signal Pakistan has taken. It's confusion in the Trump administration. And what was the need to amend a legislation already on board with bipartisan consensus to exclude the Lashkar-e-Taiba? That's point number one. Point number two is that they are going against documents that Mr. Trump signed with Mr. Modi, both in Washington and later on in discussions they had in Manila. So it's a confusion or worse in the Trump administration. How can you just say act against the Taliban, which they have not declared as a terrorist organization, and yet not act against the Lashkar-e-Taiba, which they have declared as a terrorist organization? As an Indian, it naturally causes me, a certain amount of raised eyebrows, not to speak of concern.
Stephen, is this confusion? Is this deliberate? What is Washington trying to do here?
Oh, I don't think it's deliberate, but I think it's a product of a few different factors operating. One is that, unfortunately, the U.S. public in general can be somewhat oblivious to terrorism issues out beyond the U.S. and to some extent beyond Europe and Israel for reasons having to do with politics, the history. Nothing I would justify, but that's a factor. If you ask most Americans, well, what do you think about the Mumbai terrorist attacks? They'll say, where's Mumbai? Another consideration is this historical inconsistency and even hypocrisy in terms of U.S. treatment of Pakistan and how Pakistan treats or doesn't deal with terrorists. And layered on top of that, that adds to the confusion you've described, is the inconsistency and sometimes ignorance within the Trump administration, ignorance on the part of Donald Trump himself, but inconsistency in terms of who's driving its policies, including anti-terrorism policies. Is it the Pentagon? Is it Donald Trump? Is it Congress? Sometimes they align, sometimes they don't.
Right. Mayad Ali, how do you see Islamabad and more importantly Rawalpindi responding to this stern order, if you like, from Washington?
I don't believe that it's a stern order from Washington. And I wouldn't call it confusion on part of the U.S. It's a well-calculated deception. I would rather say it, if you don't mind. It's a deception. And these are all deceptive things. It says something and it does something. Under the National Development Authorization Act, they deliberately dropped Lashkar-e-Taiba's name from the list, as already been mentioned. The Pentagon advised the State Department to just stay away from that. I think today's statement from Ms. Heather, I think, is part of or is because of the Indian, I would say, pressure on the U.S. to do more about Pakistan's so-called terrorist outfits.
So I'm going to request you all to stay with us, and we're looking at the strategy that India could deploy beyond building global pressure on Pakistan and Hafiz Saeed. What can New Delhi really do to bring him to justice? Hafiz Saeed's release was on predictable lines. We know he has been in and out of jail since the dawn of this century. This is the third time that he's been released from house arrest since the terrorist attacks in Mumbai. India's ties with Pakistan are at an all-time low. So far, Pakistan has been insincere, even dismissive of India's evidence against Hafiz Saeed. Islamabad has also been dismissive of the submissions made by David Coleman Headley, who has named Hafiz Saeed during his interrogation in the United States. Pakistan's ISI and the military have given Hafiz Saeed the free rein in the country. This explains the failure of the civilian government in the Lahore court. They failed to produce any evidence to nail him. India, on its part, can now step up diplomatic campaign against Pakistan. The Indian government has made some headway in that direction. What is required now is a sustained and relentless diplomatic campaign that names and shames Pakistan for its support to terrorists. India could also consider unilateral military action, a hot pursuit, but that will be more challenging with attendant costs in the aftermath. And let me throw it straight to the experts here. G. Parthasarathy, what do you think is India's best option now? It's been 9 years and this man is still walking free, cutting cakes and threatening India.
Well, first, coming to Washington, I think, look, when I was in Washington, there was total confusion on policy on the subcontinent. It's the same as the inconsistency on China. You say that Xi Jinping is the God's gift to mankind on the one hand, and on the other hand, you want others to join you in pressurizing China on the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. So, as I said, this is an administration where the right hand does not know what the left hand is doing, and that's something we'll have to live with. But what I do sense in Washington is a real sense of outrage, because they've now realized that the Lashkar was responsible for killing not just Indians, and there's evidence in the Chicago court of this. They killed Americans and Israelis also. So there is also Israeli pressure which is coming to act on this. As for what India should do, I think we showed something of what could be done in September, October last year in 2016. There are a range of covert and overt actions which we can take, which quite obviously it's not exactly prudent to discuss in this forum.
Understandably. But the question that every Indian watching this would be asking, what is stopping India from doing it? As you said, we will not dwell on this for very long. But Stephen, you're an expert on international law as well. According to you, can India also explore legal action options, possibly go to the ICJ as we've seen in the Jadhav case?
That's a good question. Look, already this fellow, Saeed, has been certified, if that's the right word, as a terrorist by the United Nations. It's conceivable India could take various kinds of international legal actions to try to ramp up the pressure. Does the ICJ qualify under its own statutes for this? Frankly, I don't know. And there is the broader political consideration that even if legal actions were taken to try to ramp up pressure, this is such a political question, such a security question. Will that really translate into impact, into pressure on Pakistan or affecting other countries such as the US or China's policies towards Pakistan? I don't know.
Mayad Ali, closing comments. Do you believe that there is an iota of sincerity on Pakistan's part? Did you see this going this way? Is Hafiz Saeed destined to be a big political figure the way things are going in Pakistan?
Well, I don't know whether he'll become a big political figure or not, but let me tell you, Hafiz Saeed's release has more to do with the diplomatic affairs in the West rather than the East, because the growing sort of closeness between the US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia and UAE, who are all sort of trying to get together and look at Iran for something, attacking Iran, or like, you see, they've been defeated in Syria. So Hafiz Saeed and likes, they belong to the same school of thought. The US has been doing this all along. They created Al-Qaeda, they created ISIS, and they are behind all these people who are I would say have they belong to a same school of thought. So these people are very useful to the US, and they might want to use them in achieving peace in Afghanistan. I don't think so that the US or any other Western country would press Pakistan to do something about Hafiz Saeed, because he is of great utility to them in one way or the other, because he's a big shot now. He's heading the biggest Lashkar in Pakistan, and these people are interlinked. They are interoperable. They have the same school of thought. They could be used anywhere in the world, and they've been used in other parts of the world, like Pakistani volunteers been fighting in Syria. So the US is looking at the bigger global picture rather than focusing on the problem between Pakistan and India.
Right.
And let me be very clear that as long as the US wants these people, I don't think anybody would lay a hand on that. And one more thing, talking about any covert or any other operation against Pakistan, let me be very clear on that. India needs to be very careful in that, because any such action would trigger something nasty which both countries don't afford. And one more thing, Hafiz Saeed derives his credibility, whatever credibility he has. I don't give him any credibility, by the way, but whatever credibility he has, he derives it from the struggle in Kashmir. If Prime Minister Modi could say in Dhaka that उन्होंने अपना रथ बहाया वहां पर, and he came to the refuge of Bengalis, it's the same thing. We think
it's not the same thing. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. It's not the same thing, and it's okay. I may partly agree that America was to blame in propping up some of these people, but we cannot be harping on history all the time. We have to act in the present, and I have to wrap this as well. I'm being told we have to take a break.
Your Prime Minister said.
All right, we are looking at what Hafiz Saeed did, and I'm going to thank you all, G. Parthasarthi, Stephen Golub, Mayad Ali. Ahead on the show, we'll talk about America's role. Did America really facilitate his release? And what kind of damage can Hafiz Saeed inflict on American interests in Afghanistan? Will that make them act and take a stronger action against Pakistan?